Well, I thought it would be nice to take the opportunity to, have this session, which in UK is morning. Um, so, because I was aware that for particularly people in the Far East and in Asia, a lot of the sessions are happening at times when they should be sleeping. And I don't want to keep people awake too long. Realize you need your rest. So, and hopefully you're getting all the recordings anyway, but I thought it'd be nice just to have some time when, this live time. And what I thought I'd do is just do questions via the chat box, which I'm sure you now have access to. It's down the bottom of your screen. And what is it, icons, one says chat, and you just type something in there. It's going to be a little bit chaotic because sometimes three people ask very similar question, naturally. So I'll have to look at those and try to assess, make one thing out of it. And of course, we don't want too much talking, too much, not so good for the mind. So I'm going to keep it to a fairly limited, maybe 40, 45 minutes of questions and answers. And I thought we'd just begin anyway. We just say take about 10 minutes or so, just settling in quietly together in meditation or simple presence. So that then let things settle and and so then you can put things in during that time, but ideally even just give yourself a few minutes just to really settle in and see what seems most important. Time is limited. What seems really helpful to look into now, and then just the next 15 minutes or so, you want to pop something in the chat box, and I'll open it up and I'll take a look in there within the next 10 or 15 minutes and see what I can bring up for you. Okay, so I'll start practicing responding to these questions, and hope things are going to give you some help. Person's inquiring about stream entry. How do they know? How does he or she know they've attained stream entry? Is there a moment of realization? Well, this is one of these controversial topics. It seems from the accounts in the suttas that the stream entry is a rather graduated process of the referring less and less to the personality as the center of one's intentions. What does that mean? That means instead of acting one's normal kind of fairly impulsive, this is what I think, me position, or there's a sense of the chitta instead refers to Dhamma. Right? It doesn't look in the book for what's the mindfulness program. It just acts without that personal bias. And that seems to be a graduated process. So stream entry is a removal of the placing one's center of one's life, center of one's heart on the person, in the person. Less identification with thoughts, less of identification with emotions and the body. And so identification with emotions, when an emotion happens, we really feel we are it, we're in it, we are it, the reactions start happening. Whereas with stream entry, they recognize emotion is happening, they're just, looks like things are getting stirred up here, what's that about? You see, just a slight shift doesn't mean they don't happen, but they can quieten. So the stream entry still has qualities of irritability and elements of sense desire, but they're now witnessing it rather than following it or identifying with it. Now, in some lineages, they've developed systems where they're doing particular meditation systems when they say, oh, there's a particular moment where you have this moment called magga, path moment and fruit moment. And one fruition when you actually the fruition of stream entry. And there's one moment when you're right on the edge of it, and then boom, you're in. And those are consecutive. This doesn't seem to hold up in the suttas. As to how useful this is, how useful any of this stuff is, this terminology, I take it all, keep it in the back of your mind. It's not really that important to know. Just what you want to know is whether you're suffering at all. That's the important one. And also how to promptly acknowledge stress and how one builds it up unconsciously. You build up the platform for stress by building up the person. And this is a tough topic. Life in the world often seems to demand that you be a solid person. And this is setting up, painting a bullseye on your chitta. Hit me here. And so it's not to deny there's such an experience as being a person, but as I will try to make more clear, we look at the particular attitudes and energies of organization and search for solidity and security and comfort and so on, quite normal experiences. And the ones that build up the sense of becoming more solid are the ones that are seductive, interesting, very much encouraged in the world, but they are painting a bullseye, a target on your chitta, because they don't work and causes suffering and stress. So instead, it seems quite elusive at first, putting much more emphasis on qualities such as goodwill, generosity, virtue, discipline, meditation, whether I feel like it or not, it's really, trying to own as little as possible in this world. To live lightly takes some of the pressure off, absolutely. I know this is not easy. But this is a big topic, actually. Another question. Person finds their mind is quieter in the morning, sittings on retreat, and is this because of not eating? Can you say something about fasting and how this can be a benefit for practice? Well, fasting it's got a relative term. It can mean you don't eat anything whatsoever, or it can mean you refrain from solids, or it can mean you have a 10-hour fast when you don't eat anything, or a 12-hour fast when you don't eat anything, or a longer. And there's a point of what's balanced, which you have to sense for yourself. The Buddha took fasting to an extreme, so his body was wasted away, and he found that was not useful at all because it didn't provide the strength. And yet the standard for the monastic order is at least 16 hours a day not eating. Sometimes 23 hours a day not eating, which can seem difficult, but you can drink, and obviously some of the time you're resting anyway, and other times you're meditating. And as you burn up less, because your energy system, certainly in monastic training, is encouraged to be more like steady rather than bursting, rather than strong energy and then relax. It's like steady, and it's to not, so your metabolism is not strained, and you treat it, you don't rev up, you don't do turbocharge. This definitely seems to me that the metabolism is kept at a softer tick over rate. You don't burn so much, and therefore you don't need so much food. So it's not really a deprivation, as a moderation of one's metabolism and energy output. And that pays off for meditation. It pays off because if you're living in a much quieter, steady state, you don't have to deal with the kind of surge and then the slump. And most people will find that after the eating food, the body is engaged with digesting, and that takes energy out of your system. You don't feel so sharp anymore. So probably recommended to eat, once or twice, and perhaps not eat, don't eat to satiation. In other words, have half a meal, have less, a little less. So you've got some room. You don't want to overload the body with food it doesn't need. And again, this is something if you want to experiment with that. Because again, in our society, munching is considered fun, enjoyable, social, entertaining, something to do, and all those messages are deluded. Food is for sustaining the body. And as we recognize, many people now experience obesity because they're eating sugary foods, junk foods. So the more you can think everything you eat is going to go into your body. What does your body want, need? And if you can, my sense is if I don't need to put anything in my body, I don't. Air is good. If you don't need to put anything in there, then let your body, not the mind, let the body govern the eating, not the mind. Is body contemplation needed as some adjuncts recommend? If needed, how often? As I notice, I need to watch my mind. I'm not quite certain what you're alluding to. It may be that you're referring to the anatomy, like contemplating the physicality of the body. Sort of the flesh, sinews, bones, viscera, liquids, the general kind of anatomical experience, the physical experience. And this can be helpful. Takes away vanity. They're very much identified with just the outward appearance, just as a membrane of skin stretched over some flesh, muscles, and bones. It's extremely ephemeral, extremely limited view. If so sometimes people imagine, pulling the skin off, what do you have? And so this can be used as a counteraction to when there are times a person finds themselves kind of either fascinated with their own physical appearance, or probably more commonly fascinated with other people's physical appearance, either sexually aroused or wanting to look like them. She looks so good, why can't I look like her? I don't like the way I look, all this kind of stuff. And you realize it's just, skin stretched over meat, flesh, tissues. So that can be helpful. Often I find I don't teach this a lot because I sense there are, people have got so much mental stuff to deal with in terms of worry and fear and depression and anxiety that seems to always be the topics that come up. And I generally teach in accordance with what people want to know about. Well, this one's another. It helps to undo the idea of the person being identified with this particular appearance. How to go on living with a family member that one has lost trust with because of their behavior without integrity. How to keep living with a family member whose behavior you feel lacks integrity. I think, as is so often the refrain in terms of being with other people, a good amount of space is needed to not intensely engaging with other people. It should be something that's quite careful and mindful, because you really have two karmic complexities, their own karmic complexities of one's own citta with its sensitivities and blind spots and intensities, and the other one's citta with her or his blind spots, sensitivities, and impulses, and the chance of those two matching are quite unlikely. It does happen that there is a match or a reasonable match, but one should not expect to have a constantly agreeable matching sense with other people on everything. So it's always recommended just some space so that you're not clinging. There's no clinging to the other person to be something that you want them to be, and you're not expecting too much from them. That you really maintain autonomy. And autonomy is not quite the same as independence. It means, yes, you are aware and you want to experience a quality of goodwill and trust and so forth with other people. You don't ignore them. And you want to make sure that what you're doing is of integrity. Yeah, that your actions are of integrity. Whether their actions have integrity, you can't really determine. You don't have much say over that. But if you're just reacting to them, judging them, blaming them, feeling negative about them, this does you no good. So if you want to check that habit to find fault with others, and I'm not saying by this that the other person doesn't have faults. Of course they have faults, but is it possible they're what you find disagreeable, ignoble, inappropriate in them is something you can let pass? Just, okay, that's hers, that's his, that's the way she is, that's the way he is. I don't support that, but I'm not going to get angry and upset about it. And that's both on account of one's practice, but realistically, it also means it's best not to associate too much with the people who you find yourself not in harmony with. Instead, practice sharing merit with them and sharing goodwill with them at a safe distance. So you can keep letting go of that that perception one has of them of being someone of no virtue or no integrity, because that perception is not good for you. Most important thing to remember is other people may blame, criticize us, but it's much worse if we blame and criticize them, because we have to receive the results of our own actions and they have to receive the results of theirs. Share some question. Could you share some reflections about the comprehension of sāti and samādhi, as some translations have limited their scope and meanings? Well, all words are there as efforts. Every word is an effort to try to bring something, communicate something, which is often a profound quality of mind. You try and put that inside 5 or 6 letters as one word, and it's risky. So generally with these Pali words, and particularly when you have a word is concocted in a Pali language, it's an ancient Indian culture, and you take that and you plant it in a Malaysian or Singapore or Australian or Canadian culture, and it's different culture. So the word doesn't really hit the same place. And So you try to, so we had this kind of sāti, the general standard is mindfulness. And so ideally, the way if you want to study these things, you look into the suttas and you find a number of occasions when this is used. And you try to look at the word, how it sits in context. What's happening when they use this word? What do you think he's referring to? If you look at it in different situations, it seems to be something about attention and definition of one of the definitions of mindfulness is a person is mindful, they remember the meaning of things said and done long ago. One is mindful when it remembers the meaning of things said and done long ago. The mind can retain an impression and linger in it. Can retain an impression and linger in it. So characteristically, we notice often sight, sounds, touches, just boom, 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 and they're gone. Mindfulness retains an impression. So in a way, it's a kind of a concentration, although it's the mind stabilizing on a particular experience. And so we realize, well, the best thing to do is to place mindfulness on supportive experiences, not just being, there's such a thing as wrong mindfulness, when one bears in mind something that's unwholesome, it's obsessive. Wrong mindfulness, a right mindfulness, is guided by deep attention to find a suitable topic to place one's mindfulness on. And so then the mind then absorbs and reflects upon that which has been one is mindful of. It's a fundamental tool for meditation. Yeah. It's not fixation, because one bears it in mind so that the mind can ponder, can look into it, can investigate it. So mindfulness is sometimes we see the word Dhamma Vijaya, investigation, occurs with mindfulness, or sampajanya, seeing things truly with mindfulness. So this means this phenomenon is of the nature to change. As I'm witnessing it, I'm noticing it, it fluctuates and varies. Yeah. And I can notice there are certain degrees of unwholesome or wholesome attitudes that are happening, and you keep relinquishing. So if you're practicing mindfulness, you use it to relinquish dissonant experiences and keep bearing in mind the Dhamma. This is where it's not just a tool for attention. So right mindfulness is a Dhamma practice, means there's also, it's not just holding something in mind, it's holding the Dhamma in mind, right? Right? Holding the Dhamma in mind. So you basically, you're holding in mind, bearing in mind a sense of, does this lead to stress or not to stress? Is this wholesome or unwholesome? That's kind of primary setting. Yeah, that's the primary setting. So Dhamma practice, right mindfulness comes from right view and right intention. So your primary setting for mindfulness is this worth bearing in mind? Am I bearing it in mind with a sense of how is this subject to stress or comfortable, or does it give rise to unwholesome states? So that wisdom in mindfulness as a Dhamma practice. So it's not just a mode of maintaining attention, it's also a mode of conducive to the Eightfold Path. Samādhi means often translated as concentration. I had reservations about that term because concentration in terms of the world is often associated with concentrating on something, like concentrating on a problem, concentrating on a project, concentrating on a detail of one's work. So the focus is sharp, narrow and intense, concentrating on an object. And if you look into the suttas and you review these things, you see that samādhi doesn't mean that. It's not concentration on an object. It refers to the mind being settled and composed. So the mind is settled, not distracted, not shaking, not sinking. It's settled and composed, and still, quiet. That is samādhi. Now, how does that arrive? You might say, does it arise through focusing intensely on an object? And not really. It arises through being mindful of an object. So it arises from right view, contemplating thoughts, feelings, perceptions, bodily sensations, energies, and so forth, with this mindful wisdom to sense what is stressful, not stressful, what leads to peace, what leads away from it. And through that process, mindfulness begins to clean the hindrances from the mind, cleans the hindrances, cleans out the obstructions, cleans out the dross. When it's cleaned out the dross, the mind becomes bright and pure and settles. This is called samādhi, and it's a happy state. It's a pleasant state. Mind is, so when the five hindrances, ill will, sense desire, dullness, restlessness, and doubt, are removed from the mind through this process, the mind settles, feels pleased, stabilizes in itself, and this is called samādhi. If one experiences rapture during meditation, should contemplation be undertaken during or after this state has passed? Well, rapture that's born from meditation or disengagement is the sense of the coolness and the ease and the elimination of the hindrances. There are different ways in which the experience called rapture can occur. Piti is the Pali word, and it means there's a certain uplifted, buoyant state. There's a certain mind feels happy, and also there's a kind of like a bodily vigor. One feels bright, uplifted. And this can occur in worldly terms. You go to listen to some music, and it's really wonderfully done. You feel bright, lifted. You go for a walk in the forest or something, and you go down this magnificent view, and you feel, oh, fantastic, and you're uplifted by the sight or the sound. This is called worldly rapture, and unfortunately, it passes when the sight or sound stops. So more useful is what's called the not unsensed, but rapture that's not born of sense contact, but rapture that's born just through the mind settling back into itself rather than being engaged with sense contact, rather than running out and making more of it or pushing away and fearing it. It's just a sense of that's a sight, that's a sound, that's a thought. There it is. And more and more we can linger in that disengaged state. It doesn't sound very attractive when I put it like this, but it really is extremely fruitful. It really is what meditation is about, finding that place where you're not hooked up, and the relief. And because everything sense world is so moving so fast that your mind is always doing, and just to not have that happening. Ooh, a sense of relief, piti. So the skillful use of piti is to not get too excited by it. If it's becoming too exciting, so you're getting sort of a bit too over-energized, bring your attention into the body. So just imagine, as the Buddha uses this image, mixing soap powder in water in a sponge, so that the piti saturates the body, and the body kind of helps to create some ballast and keep you grounded. And of course, you can notice what particular practices arose that generated piti, what caused the hindrances to decline. That's important to notice, and notice also what piti makes available, what rapture makes available for you, a sense of stability and ease, and notice any clinging to it and how that generates stress and becomes an obstacle. Person finds how difficult to see dukkha in sense pleasures. Well, I know it's difficult to let go of them, but well, you learn. If you feel the endless thirst, where you have to have more. It's pleasant for a while, and then it passes, and then something else. So that's the insatiable nature of it. Now, generally, the way the mind is pretty simple. That it will what's pleasing and most long-lasting, it will go for. So you have to find another source of pleasure. So the mind says, oh, you could have this one's better. And that's the strategy of Dhamma, the pleasure of meditation, pleasure of, as I've just mentioned, the pleasure of the disengaged mind, the pleasure of feeling contented, the pleasure of self-respect, the pleasure of good friends, the pleasure of having a purposeful, meaningful life. All these have different levels of agreeable qualities to them that don't burn up the mind. They're not addictive. And so one is encouraged to cultivate Dhamma in line with pleasure. So more questions about eating. Should 8 precepts be limited to special training days? I think it's really good to do that if you can. I mean, working life it can be challenging to keep these refraining from eating afternoon, because you may have to be working all morning. They won't give you a break until 2. Yeah. So, yeah. But then if you do have the opportunity, say and it needn't be necessarily the observance days. It could be, okay, my weekend, I got some spare time. I'm not pressurized to work then. I can keep the 8 precepts on a Saturday or a Sunday or something like that. It's not a fixed dogma. They only lose the lunar days because that was the way the Indian calendar worked. Everybody would use the lunar observance days, and it'd be quite common for people to undertake some kind of religious practice. But so now you get the 7-day week and working week, which crashes through that. So a person's asking about keeping UK eating precept based on UK time. I think it's best to keep the precept based on your own time. You can say, look at what's, if you're in Asia, then, basically, if you can work around, using the 8 precepts on the not eating after noon in your local time zone. This may be that this Dhamma practice session is occurring at that time. That's why I haven't really specified it, because I can realize that, these practice sessions for some people might actually be occurring at that time between 10 and 12 where they should be eating. So you can then, make a meaningful adjustment, a sense of, purpose. I think the theme is that you essentially, you have the meal and you have a long period of not eating. A person has the issue of entitlement, wanting other people not to have entitlement. I think I am right. It should be fair. I should be praised, etc. Well, this is certainly plenty of suffering in that. Yeah. You should not seek to be measured by the world, worldly opinions, views about how good you are, not good you are, worthwhile, ignored, praise. It's just too much suffering. One should recollect one's virtues on a daily basis. You've kept 5, 8 precepts that very few people in the world do. If you manage to do that, it requires discipline and restraint and clarity and a sense of purpose. And just notice those qualities that are present. And the results of them. And they should give you happiness. As long as we approach life from being a person, it's not very satisfying at all. Yeah, because the person is essentially very much created by social contact. I don't mean, I know you have a body and you have a heart and this and the other, but the personality is something that develops through other people's contact. When you're a little child, you don't have much personality, but it starts being shaped by the approval and disapproval of other people. So you learn how to negotiate in order to get on with other people. That's and how to organize and how to be part of the group. So you start to adjust your behavior to fit in with the rest of the group. That's normal. You start to pick up the signals of what other people are doing and how to respond to that. That's normal. You start to pick up the signals they give you that tell you you're doing something wrong or they don't like, and you respond to that. And you start to plan what will give you the results whereby you'll be accepted and pleased. Other people will be welcoming to you. So you start to shape your actions to fit that. This is all very understandable. But it's a bit like being somebody's pet, when you lose your autonomy. Now, it doesn't mean you want to be gross and rude and don't care about anybody else, but you realize that if you're looking for your self-esteem based upon the measurements and views of other people, it's you're looking in the wrong place. Some will like, some won't like. Some will like you but don't mention it because they think you know already. Some will think you're great but not say anything about it. And some people will not notice you, and some people will probably dislike you or feel jealous of you or feel all kinds of things. And so it gets very confusing because you can't keep ducking and shaping yourself to fit everybody else. Views and opinions. So what do you take refuge in? You take refuge in your own integrity and, you know, acknowledge your faults, but make an effort to notice what is a fault in yourself. Yeah, and don't judge other people. It doesn't do you any good. You know, whether they're having a good time or not, that you feeling it's not fair is painful, isn't it? Directly speaking, it's painful. And it sets up the notion that things should be fair. As far as I can see, things are not fair. I don't think fair, it's a lovely idea, and one would search for more equality and equivalence, but basically social world is not fair. People get advantage and privilege, criminal people get power, people with low integrity get lots of money. It's not fair. But one thing is fair. You get the results of your actions, of your karma. That's what counts. That's very fair. But you can't see it from the outside. So if your actions, if you're finding fault with other people and feeling jealous, and then look at the results of that. Just leave it alone. Leave it alone. Someone asks about, does one need to be in a monastery to speak to and receive guidance from a teacher, as the need arises from the teacher's perspective as well as the student's perspective? Well, I think there are many teachers in the world, and they're not all monasteries, and not that many monks are teachers, or nuns, and they're not all teachers. They're companions, they're people working out their karma, and many of them feel that the monastery itself is a teacher. That is, you learn from looking at what people are doing, you're getting regular talks and so forth. So they don't, but they don't necessarily regard themselves as having the skills or the training or whatever it takes to work on somebody else's stuff. I mean, so any monastery is likely they will have some opportunity to ask questions, but not just any old, whenever you feel like it. It might be once a week or once a month or something, and the chance of getting a personal one-to-one interview, not that great, because often there's lots of stuff going on. People not that many teachers have the capacity to dedicate time to individuals. If you are a teacher, you might have teaching 200 people or something like that. You can't take on that many individuals. But you can, like listening to talks and thinking things through and asking relevant questions when the occasion arises, and remembering, and taking a little bit and remembering and bearing it in mind. So even at the time of the Buddha, the chance of meeting the Buddha weren't that good. So you might only see him once in your lifetime, once or twice in your lifetime, and you have to be mindful. Look at the structures of the teaching and work it out. And but otherwise, there are lots of retreat centres where one can receive and go do a retreat. You generally get some degree of interview and one-to-ones or group interview for guidance. I think we're just coming to the end of this session. See if I know there are more questions. And I'm wondering also if there's something that could be of general interest. Clarity arises due to causes and conditions on a daily basis. What to look out for or check. Mind states and 5 spiritual faculties. Yes. If when there is release or comfort or contentment or clarity, the mind feels comfortable, it's good to investigate what caused that. And this is where we begin to, and also what causes it to decline. And this is when you start to get some familiarity with the Buddhist terminologies, terms such as four establishments of mindfulness, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 4 paths to success, and there's a whole list of these. So it can seem like you're just learning a language, but actually these refer to distinct spiritual qualities, such as motivation, chanda. 5 spiritual faculties are, we think, saddha, faith, openness, virya, energy, sāti, mindfulness, samādhi, collectedness, steadiness of mind, firm composure, and paññā, discernment. So these are one cluster of factors, and noticing when they're present, when they're absent. When they're absent, how to restore. The most important one to restore is faith. This means because we're often finding ourselves lost or confused, and therefore if we go into doubt, I can't do this, I can't make it, then we give up. But the idea is when you feel challenged, then wait a minute, bring up your faith, your sense of there can be a way through this. Suffering is to be understood, not just to be feeling you failed. Despair. Suffering is something you've got to have the faith you can penetrate it, understand it. Virya means that faith takes a specific result. Because of the faith, my energy goes to investigating that and bringing up the faculties that will support dismantling obstructions. Mindfulness, one bears the Dhamma in mind. Okay, you bear the teachings. Things are impermanent. Conditions are impermanent. Conditions are unsatisfactory. Craving is to be abandoned. Personality view is an obstruction. You bear these teachings in mind, and then you bring that to bear upon the particular problem you're experiencing. So, oh yes, that's because I was identifying with that. How did that happen? So, and then samādhi, this always means that the mind has dropped problem, hindrance, and it settles. So, and in that sense, and then that's makes the mind firm. Samadhi is food for the mind. And discernment, always necessary, again, to keep reviewing skillful, unskillful states. This is a skillful state, this is an unskillful state. Put aside the person identification, person package, just say this was a skillful state, this was an unskillful state, rather than I am this, I am that. And this kind of pattern leads to stress and suffering, and this pattern leads out of it. So you start to assess things. in these terms. And this is the way you really make a lot of progress on the path. So I'll offer that for your reflection this morning, or whatever time it is for you today, tomorrow, or yesterday, depending wherever you are in time or place, or in terms of your karma. May this be well, and may some Dhamma reach and be of benefit to you.